Welcome everybody. This is our third session. The ball starts to really start moving now. And what I want to give you a little bit of overview of where we're at using the mural board. Today we're going to talk about the first four classes. So that first class where the road rarely traveled, you're going to expose students to that. I think you saw with Frank that about half the students in his class don't even realize they're going to do a campaign. So you got to get people geared up. And then these next three classes are really sort of developing the issue, beginning to figure out how to choose the campaigns and really have those campaigns chosen and setting the tone for how the class is going to run differently than most classes. So getting that stuff organized. And we're going to talk through some questions today about each of these sessions. What I'm going to ask you to do right now, just real briefly, is just go in here. You're not choosing your students' campaigns. That's kind of probably a bad idea. But you may have a sense of the kinds of campaigns your students, you're going to be directing them towards. And we're sort of roughly saying campaigns that are ultimately focused on the campus, issues on the campus, those that are community focused. Some folks may be combining the two. So students can choose whatever they want. Scott does, they're in both the combination. But also in some cases, students go serve on a campaign that's really a community or organizations campaign, often becoming the student wing of that campaign. So if you just take a second and double click, put a sticky note on this mural board, just with your name, where you think your campaign, students' campaigns in your class will be most likely directed. Nobody's going to hold you to this, but Scott and I sort of want to, as we start talking to the students about launching their own campaigns and naming them and figuring out who the targets are and stuff like that, the demands, it's good for us to have a sense of where you guys are thinking, sort of ground our conversation in the kind of the pragmatic work that we'll be doing. Yeah, that's right. In some cases, you actually may already have an issue because your course is on a certain issue, perhaps food justice in that case. So you don't have to name the campaigns specifically, but if you have a focus of the class and kind of where you think that might be taking place. We have 4 of them for today, and we'll discuss them in our smaller rooms, then we'll just come back as a whole group and report back. So this very first class, again, it may be that your advertising is better than Scott's, and everybody knows they're going to be doing campaigns when they show up in class. That's number 1. Number 2, it's going to be a different kind of class, and they're going to be operating differently than they normally do. And Scott wrote quite a bit about that in that chapter, and that highlight video shows some of those things. So the breakout question is pretty straightforward. How are you going to introduce and prepare your students to choose and lead a campaign? Scott talked about things like how he sets up his room, the questions he poses, how he actually literally talks about student voice, emails he might be sending to folks. All those things are all oriented towards getting them going. This is really practical kind of stuff. So I'm going to get the breakout rooms.
The questions really, there was a lot in the readings, there was in the video, right, about how I do it, right? So, that's one way. And there's some, positives, I'm sure some negatives about it, So it's not my hope is to give you some ideas of how I kind of do this, like, right, we're playing on your mark, get set, go. This is preparing them to go. In fact, preparing them to go on class 2, which is the next class. So how do you do that? And so that's the question I'm raising, that you're gonna have a fundamentally different experience than all your other classes. And we have one class to kind of prepare you for that. So what is within your wheelhouse, your knowledge base, your life experience too, that you could add to that? Because, right, there are themes, I'm sure. So it's really to kind of get you to brainstorm, like what was in the reading and in the chapter, and then what is your possibilities that you'll bring to it, and then you'll create something that's new, which is for you. So maybe Julie, what you suggested, like I was taking notes because I thought that was really helpful, and what you were saying. Like what you do differently.
Well, I wish I could speak for the whole group. I can't. I was listening, but I can't replay everything that everyone said. I remember Akila said something about making sure that students had a particular reading ahead of time, or that they had the context for understanding a little bit before they jumped into other materials. I talked myself about making sure that the students knew ahead of time by the class description that it was going to be different, and finding a different physical space in the classroom when I arrived that was not at the front of the room, bringing a jam box and playing music in the class. So when they came in, they were a little bit like, what's going on? This never happens in the classroom. And I'm sorry, I can't remember, Frank, if you offered additional things, or as Annette, I apologize for not being able to
That's good.
describe.
And going back on Akila's point, or do you want to say, Frank?
Yeah, I can jump in because
No, please.
just hearing some of the conversations, it made me think about an assignment that I have, and it's called an autobiographical sketch. And I have the students think about their relationship to race, for example, their racial identity, but also ways in which they have resisted or challenged racism. And so if I can do, I have that assignment maybe like the fourth week of class. So if I can have that assignment the first day or second day of our class session and actually have them do it in class in real time, then that can start to set the stage for thinking about their identity, raising their conscious level, and then hopefully leading to issues and topics that are important to them.
And just playing on that, Frank, as you notice that several of the portfolio questions are the questions I ask in class, right? So they see it as, they hear it as a group, they hear people, and then they reflect even more based on the reading, and they have some more time to do some deeper thinking. But I definitely use that, and it's helpful. It's like it's the pre of the assignment. So I think that's a great idea. I think any way to get into that student talk rather than teacher talk is wonderful. What are your group, Bobby?
Well, there are a couple questions. So Susan, why don't you pose your question first, and then we'll.
The first question I posed was timing with respect to problem statements versus issues or slogans that you were talking. In the interest of time, I had wanted to introduce problem statements and then have students choose one so we can go. But that might not be the best approach, because I understand that probably maybe it's better to lead the students through to get to the problem statement, but then you're already 2 to 3 weeks in. So I was posed the question of what's the best way to handle that? And so we wanted to ask.
Yeah. Well, we talk about in day two, I mean, it's obvious where I come down, which is get them in, because when you start out talking about a problem statement, and let's say the research around that to me is they'll want to do that once they've selected their issue, because it's huge, right? If they do a historical analysis and to understand the problem, you'll see it later. My work is at least 5 citations from research articles. So they're going to do a deep dive, but I find it better to get them started, because then right from the beginning, they can start going out and talking to people about the campaign. They can start doing tabling right from the beginning. And I guarantee when they start tabling, they realize they need some more information. And then that serves to help them get the problem, to have a better understanding of the problem. So it's kind of flipping it on its head. And some people criticize that. I can accept that, but I found it more successful than going it the other way.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I find you have to go through that. If you try to give them problem statements up front, you have to go through it anyway. So maybe
you're go through it
better.
So Scott, the other question we had to do with the size of the teams.
Yep.
And I know the minimum is 3, but the maximum can be the whole class. So there's sort of 2 questions there. One is, what is it like to manage really big teams? And the one that went along with that was, how might you grade them? How do you handle the sort of?
So it's a multiple question. So I have 6 teams right now. It's insanity. 1 professor, 6 teams. Because I'm emailing all of them, I would actually prefer 3 or 4, but it's 6. It's what they chose. So it's a lot. I ask for other professors who are interested in the topics to help. So there are another professor is taking 2 of as the advisor to the group. So I don't have to be the advisor of every group. So that's a challenge. The challenge on the other hand is when, like in the minimum wage campaign, by the end, they're all in it, or the Gulf Coast Civic Works project, they were all in it, is then to divide up all the work. So you're still in smaller teams, because there might be a media team and there might be someone doing, focusing on, various aspects of the campaign. So it's to give them, so when you have 30 people, you don't want to let anyone slide by, right? So there's another set of issues with that. the other question was, what was it about?
Grading.
Grading. So it's very hard for the students because they're thinking group. And when it comes to the grades, there is a combination of individual and group, but a lot of the portfolios are individual. And so they can talk about in the group, but I want to see what they're thinking. So it's individual. But however, the campaign notebook is a group project. It's 20% of it's one of the portfolios. Their campaign presentation is a group grade. And then when they do their research, they can be in teams of 2 and 3 because there's 3 aspects of that. So sometimes they're individual, but sometimes they're in 2s and they can do it as a group. So there's some group and some individual. And that's really kind of a preference thing, whatever you all think is best, I think. But I have my reasons for doing it. And it's mostly just to hold people accountable.
So let's move to the next question. And some of them will cover the stuff we've just been talking about. So in class 2 and 3, and part of class 4, it's really helping them choose their campaigns. And there's a whole process there. And so look at the 2nd and 3rd class using this approach. How are you going to begin to get them into those teams? You know, and we talk about reasonably clear demands and targets at this early stage. That's a refinement process that takes weeks at the end of the day. But so how are you going to think about doing that? And Scott recommended some readings. You also saw his syllabus. What are you going to include from your own experiences and your own knowledge, your own sort of background in this work in that process, in teaching it and leading conversations around it? So it's the first one is classes get them sort of oriented to the idea this is real about change. This one is now we're going to get ourselves into groups and the sort of the winnowing process. Scott, you want to add a little bit of that before?
Yeah, and I'd say this is, in the terms of classes, this is really class 2 and 3. Class 4 is the first half of that is we're just wrapping it up and putting them in to their final groups and making sure everyone has it, and then talking to the ones that don't have a group in my office or on Zoom that night. But it's really the class 2 and 3, which is getting them in those campaigns. And so they come out by, class 5, they're in a campaign that has an issue, that has a clear demand, or at least getting closer to a clear demand, not a slogan. And I define it, in the book Change, about what are the 5 or 6 components of an issue, right? One is a clear demand it's short, quantifiable, no more than 3 demands. So they have that, and that's a portfolio question too. So they're not only verbally learning it and through the reading, but they're actually having to write it out, which is important to do. So it's that, and then again, what will you bring into from your life and experiences and knowledge base that's going to make this beginning of getting them into the campaigns possible? Because it is, I'm just saying, it's the biggest challenge. It's the most exciting part of the class. They can't even believe it's happening, and they're actually kind of shocked that, wow, by the end of class 4 we're all in campaigns. So like, how are you going to do it? I have some ideas, of course, and then what are those you're going to use, and what are you going to not use and use on have something else. So let's have that conversation.
Great. All right, so I'm going to create the rooms. I'm going to create 3 rooms this time with 3 and 4 people. I raised the question at the tail end of the on-campus campaigns, focused campaigns versus the off-campus ones, and whether anybody was thinking they would prohibit the on-campus ones. Remember that presentation we went to where they said, I've solved that problem with the political dynamic on campus by prohibiting those. And there's various dynamics to that. Since so many high percentage of yours are on-campus focused, can you talk a little bit about the off-campus focus examples that weren't them joining somebody else's campaign, but ones they initiated? I'm thinking of the food trucks. But
no, that was an organization.
That was an organization as well?
That was Sacred Heart Community Services. They came in and pitched that idea. Students joined it, and they became a student wing to that food truck campaign. Or are there many examples of students initiating a campaign in a community that? Yeah, minimum wage. That was a student's idea. Gulf Coast Civic Works. That was a student idea. Now, the Gulf Coast Civic Works was really important when the students decided to do that. I said, well, you better send an email down to the Gulf Coast and see what they think about it, because you're in California, you all know nothing about the Mississippi and Louisiana. So they sent out letters, down to the NAACP. And what was amazing about that was this huge response from people in the Gulf Coast, like, first of all, like, oh my gosh, someone out there cares and is interested. And second, a lot of them said, we've been thinking about doing a public works project and just haven't had the time because we're just trying to survive. Let's work together. So that was the experience. And then we, from then on, the students always worked in collaboration with those organizations.
Yeah. How about with neighborhood groups around San Jose State? Has that much of that happened?
So they've pitched, some of those have pitched, haven't selected. I'm thinking like that independent auditor was that was a Faith in Action project. I was thinking it was I thought for sure it would get selected, and then it didn't. I'm trying to think of other community-based groups that have been on the campus that were community. The ones that there's, I would say, at 70%, they're so dominant, of the campus ones. And the thing is that they're not all directed at the president. Sometimes they're the dean of the library. Sometimes they're at an art commission, board. So it's not like they're not all going after one person. And so there's not like, it's like 6-on-1 or something like that. So I think that helps. But I think that the campus, they're there. They for sure happened. There was one on voting rights. The students were involved with the Labor Council. So they're there. And again, I really try to encourage those folks to come in once a week, once every couple of weeks into the class to talk to the students, so they're on page, they're on, they're thinking the same as they are. They're working together.
So let me just ask the other two groups if there's a question or an example of things that you guys talked about. Okay, so Scott, the part I have my eye on the clock, and what I'd like to just touch on this third question, but maybe just us all together rather than breaking out. And I think you might want, if there's time, you might want to show a short video. So this idea of sort of how do you get every single student into a campaign? And there'll be some just folks who can't quite decide or something about it. And then there's this sort of maybe a parallel dynamic of a student who comes into this and just says, whether they're realist or whether they're cynical depends on your point of view, but they just say, I don't believe things can change, or I certainly don't believe I can make anything change. And you talk about that in the book. But I'm sort of curious to know how other folks have thought about that question, because I think a lot of what we are dealing with is folks who feel disempowered, and how you might inspire that. And I think part of the reason Scott shows some of these videos is, in fact, to both demystify what they're going to be involved in a little bit, but also to inspire them a little bit. And so we'll show that video in a second. But just curious how people are thinking about that aspect of it. As the students who are coming into your classes, and are some of them kind of both either very indecisive, or are they also, or separately, are they kind of don't believe this is going to happen?
Oh, I was just going to say, the students that I have, they're all eager, but they're wanting to address sort of systemic. I want to address systemic racism. I'm like, okay. So for me, it's getting them to bring it down to something manageable more than anything, and help them understand that. So I think I don't have so much the issue of them not getting involved, or them not understanding what the charge is, but I think the manageable and being able to understand that you have to identify something specific that comes of this. And that's been my challenge more so of, okay, in what way? And so creating opportunities for them to sort of learn from one another, or even, I think more so providing examples. And so that's why I really like what is the handout? The social action, the student reflections.
Yes.
Because it shares some of those specific examples of campaigns specificity.
Wonderful.
That's helpful.
Who else wants to add to that?
I'll add. I don't think I'll have a problem. I have 17 teachers around the Bay Area that, my class is about social justice and educational leadership. So they all want to do something like right now. So I have to, this semester, I've had to kind of pull them back a little bit because they want to make all the changes. And so I don't think I'll have that much of a problem, but it's really about honing it all in and what does it look like for each school or each school district and how that looks. But my group helped me with that a lot in our small group.
Scott, we have a few minutes for your video, but before we get there, I just want to show one thing that we added to the, oh, I have my screen share on. So one thing we added to the course material page, which are, the book is referencing a bunch of things. It says www.bonner./socialaction-docs. It was sort of the link that you'll see in the book. So we created a page on the foundation website that has those links, right? And a bunch of them are videos. There are also references to some photos, so we collected photos. You can look through those. We've collected a bunch of videos, and these are just all embedded right here. So Scott's going to show a couple minutes of one of these, but these are good things to show students early and maybe even often to get them really feeling like, oh, I can do that. There's even, you know, the photos are there are of students tabling. So this is what it looks like. The flyers are kind of fun because these are the kind of things people are putting together. You can click on one of these and it goes full screen. So Scott, I'm going to stop sharing, and why don't you?
Yeah. Can you in that thing? Can you just put up the student reflections, because Akila talked about it, and so this is how I deal with the questions with regards to, can I make a difference? And I would say the vast majority of my students don't think they can make a difference. They enter the experience thinking someone else might be able to do it, like Martin Luther King or, you know, Tommy Smith. He's 23 feet tall, for God's sake. He could do it. Or Cesar Chavez, he's got a monument right there with Gandhi. They could do it, but not them. So how do we help them in the process that they think they can do it? And one of the ways I do it is have them read students who've gone through the experience. So you have it there. You can show.
Yeah, I have it right here. It's
you see that link, you know, where where you can get it. You can get all, 10 of them that I use all semester long. The first one is of Josh Burrows. If you go down.
Yeah, so it's the Alumni Student Reflections.
Yeah, so there it is. So when you click on that, right, Josh Burrows is the first one. And what's awesome about Josh, just say right there, is if you just look at it starts off when they were in the class. Yeah, he was enrolled 2007, right? One of the second class we ever did. He graduated with a BA in sociology, just like a lot of them, community change. Went on to get a master's, so they see that. There's his organization. And then it says, what's his occupation? We're gonna leave it there. Why that's important is that it shows their development. And some of them have graduated in 2010 will have a less than Josh, or 2015, but they start seeing a pathway for them in their life work to make a difference and change. So here he is, currently founder and publisher of Spotlight, a nonprofit news organization, very important in our community, focused on politics in South Bay. Previously worked for state senator, 2 council members in San Jose, managed a campaign for mayor, and worked for a housing advocacy nonprofit. So kind of a pretty, strong resume. And so they start seeing, well, I can do that too. And then there's a statement, what was the impact on the student? So my social action experience was a really transformative experience, both in college and then goes in adult life. I was finishing up my undergraduate career and had no idea what I wanted to do after college, and then took the class and started to get a path. So they can relate to that. This is their experience of how they're currently feeling. And then they get to the alumni questions, which they're all asked these same questions, which are, what are your takeaways from your campaign? And then what did you learn? And it goes through every chapter. What did you learn about issue development? What did you learn about research? And I love this. Our research played a critical role because, students really don't like doing that much research. So it's like, if you want your campaign to be successful, it is going to play a critical role for you, and it must be done. So I give them examples from previous people. So that's one way I do it. And so these are all available for you. And I would say, as you start teaching this and you start having graduates, I would recommend that you ask them, hey, would you write up a few questions, respond to a few questions for me, and have them read your students. You can use my students now. That's what we have. But as you teach it, you can use your students and develop a packet of information that they can read, students just like them in the same class room that they're in can have these transformative experiences and have, a pathway, not just to their college, of how to bring about change, which is important, but also for their life's work. So another way I do it is I show videos. I also invite them to come in and speak to the students. So in the first 10 classes, I probably have 3 alumni who've gone through it, who they're going to read about or have read about that day, speak to them. So they have a firsthand experience. And one thing we don't do well in this, business does it way better than us, is create pipelines for jobs. So every one of my students says to them, yeah, here's my email. I'll help you think about a job for you too. And I ask my students to do that, my alumni, to try to give them a pathway. So I'm going to show you this very brief 2-minute. You already saw, if you saw the video, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to watch the video of of me teaching that little 15-minute thing that Bobby puts together. So let me go over here, pull this up. It's from Walk the Walk. Do you want to show that again where that is on the Dealey Bob?
Yeah.
On that list, Bobby? Do you have that? So there's the trailer.
A couple different ways of getting there, but
show them back to the readings. Show them to the readings. Click on readings.
The readings are here.
I'm going to put all my readings up here too, so you'll have access to that. But if you go right to here, video, all the videos are all there. And the first one, Walk the Walk, I recommend go back though. You can watch the trailer there, but you can click on, there's another link to it. If you click on that, you can actually buy it for a few, whatever they charge, $50, or you get the university to buy it. And then you can have access to it, right? I have access to it. I'm going to show you just 2 minutes. Here's Myra Burnaby and Selena and talking about their experience in the class. Again, trying to show that, change is possible. So I'm going to put this up and then I'm going to let you hear it. Here you go.
So one of the ways we try to gain power and, just get more support was also to go out of the school and into the larger community to set up meetings with our city leaders. We've had the mayor come and publicly announce his support towards us. We have met and continuing to meet with the state assembly members and our state senators to talk about it in the larger discussion in longer terms for us, making sure that there's no students across California who is, having to face this.
I know that handing out a meal to the homeless, it only helps them for a day. It's like the old Chinese proverb, if you teach a man to fish, then you feed him for his lifetime. So I learned that, there's systemic changes that have to be made. There's legislative changes that have to be made to prevent people from being homeless.
When I came into this classroom, I remember our professor said, this is going to be a life-changing class. This is, you might not believe the change is possible, but it is. And I wanted to believe it, but there is still some type of doubt in me. And I was like, well, maybe. And then little did I know, just within the semester, we were talking to the media, we were talking to different people. And now I would say change is possible. If you have the motivation, the drive, the passion, or even the anger, I would say just that spark in you that comes and you say, this is an injustice. This is not right.
There's a crisis of democracy.
So going back, right? Am I back? Can you see me? Am I off that? So what did you hear and see in that? Just let's say 2 or 3 minutes. I really want to hear what you said because it's super important. What did you hear and see in that video?
Passion.
If I had to do it quickly, I'd just say students are learning how to feel empowered because it's a process, a long one.
What else?
What I got from it is definitely students are passionate, and I love the main phrase she said, from a place of anger.
Yeah.
And I think that feeling is so taboo and we're so afraid of that feeling. But I think a lot of social justice movements come from anger. And that would be something that I would honestly start my class around or with, is what makes you angry, what pains you, and go from there.
So in chapter 1 of this book, Change, which is assigned, I sent it to you, the preface in chapter 1 and 2 you have to go out and buy it now. I can't send you the whole thing, but in chapter 1, I give 5 examples of issue development and of how they develop issues, specific, quantifiable issues. And in every one of they start out with, I was morally outraged. You know, I was so angry. And so we talk about that language of, you have to have that fire, of the sense of, because that's what's going to keep you motivated, not just for these 3.5 months, but really for a lifetime of freedom fighting, is that you have to have that sense of, this is not right, and we want to make it better. I hopefully also you heard in there the language of policy and legislation, because both of them talked about it, and most students don't talk about it. That language, we're talking about policy change and legislation, and we work with the mayor, and we work with our state assembly members and our state senators. How many my students coming out of my class, they know all of those folks, and because they've met them and they've worked with them. And so that's the kind of, I think, what we offer our students, like this understanding of how power operates in our community. So I think that's a key part. And then you heard Myra say, which I really talk with the students about, is that change, you know, I heard him say it. I wanted to believe him, but I really didn't believe him, because that's really the reality. Because even in the beginning, I know they think I'm just jiving him, you know, I'm just BSing them. It's not really going to happen. But they see Myra, and then they meet Myra in a Zoom, and then they have a chance to maybe meet her later and other students, and then they have their own experience, and they start feeling like, as one of the students says later in the reading, is that I got faith back that, you know, our democracy can even work, which I think is a good thing for our community right now, our democracy. So I think I'll end there. And then Frank, I like yours, gaining their humanity back, right? Recognize that policy changes are necessary, as Julie said. Yep.
I think that personal transformation. I came in, you know, just another student, just kind of like, and then they all of a sudden they've graduated from the class. Look at that photograph of them in front of the press, you know,
Yes.
And the poise and just the sense of, and that just doesn't happen very often. But from what you've described, it seems to happen often in this kind of class. That they all kind of get out of their shell, and they get well coached, but there they are, and they're going in with a group, so they're not solo doing that.
Yeah,
that poise, that before and after, just is amazing to me.
The juxtaposition, you know, I always, the picture that's on here, like if you know those students, like if you know the student at the front there with standing up in a suit, like, you know, 2 hours before she was just like the students, but she understood that she was in front of all the media she wanted to present. And that's the physical transformation that sometimes literally happens, but also what you're talking about, the deeper transformation happens with the students. And it happens with many of them. I'm watching it right now in front of my eyes as my students are transforming. And it's invigorating. I think you can have similar experiences with this. Any other comments? All right.
We're going to be pushed on time here, so let's just jump over the mural board one more time. Julie just wanted me to remind everybody how to navigate this. Really, you can squeeze your mouse in and zoom way out. There's also some zoom tools here on the right, which are sort of a little bit more crude, but you can, and they just sort of move your way around. On the right-hand side, have these outlines, and I did a better job with this one where it zeroes you in on the top of this class. These ones are a little too narrow, a little too focused, so you got to zoom out to get there. But it's once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. But just zoom out, figure out where you want to go, and then zoom back. I'm going to zoom back in here this time I'll hide the outline. So there's this idea of part of this whole first bunch of classes are set in a tone. This is a different kind of class, and you're going to be asked to do things that you don't normally asked to do in a class, and that includes within the class itself, but also within your team, right? And so part of your role is to model and to get people talking about different models of leadership, more inclusive, thinking about how the process and the dynamics of the group figure into that. And so as you think about this, sort of the question to pose, maybe we'll just try to answer a couple here real quickly, but kind of how might you think about that? And when you have a chance to work on this, Maybe you already do this in some of your other classes. This part can happen in other classes, of course, but any sort of particular models you guys think about already as you come into this part of it? Okay. Scott, you just want to comment on this a little bit?
I would like to say something. So just it's in the book, in the change book for the guide, but it's also in change here and page 22. And it really is a transformative experience when the students read this definition of leadership, this inclusive definition, which says this. It says, I believe that leadership should be defined as someone who thinks about the group and helps it function effectively. Thinks about the group and helps it function effectively. That's what leadership is. And when they hear that, rather than someone in a kind of a more of an older definition, not very inclusive, which is like, out in front, leading the pack, out in front, giving great speeches. Most of my students don't feel like that's not leadership. Like they can't do that kind of leadership. If that's leadership, I'm not a leader. In fact, Myra said that, the woman you just heard speak, who's this amazing leader. But once students, a majority of students hear that, someone who thinks about the group and helps it function effectively, they feel like I can do that. And we have a longer conversation about it, about various roles they can play. Some people might be doing flyers. That's how they can contribute. Somebody might be speech writers or giving the speeches. Some might like to work with the media. Some can do research. You have a role to play in helping the group move forward, and you're thinking about it. And that really is liberatory to my students. They really feel like, okay, they start buying in more after they hear that, because up to that point, they're like, yeah, that's that Martin Luther King guy, or, we got a building named after him, or, Cesar Chavez Monument. I can't do that. So this helps them. So I really want to say that. And then I just start seeding. There's going to be a group process section later but I start seeding the notion of they have to be active listeners, and there have to be persistent. And what John Sarvey used to call from Cool used to call stick-to-itiveness. There's going to have to be a lot of energy and stick-to-itiveness and persistence to be a good leader, and one that is going to have to be able to be, have integrity. This is on page 24 and 25 of the book Change. And we talk about, being honest, open. And when you say you're going to do something, if you can't do it, then you're going to have to get someone else to do that, or call the group and say, I can't do it, because otherwise the group will eventually start folding and failing if people promise to do something and then they don't get it done. So be open and honest and have good communication. So I start seeding that conversation in the setting of the tone, but really the key part of that is this new definition of leadership. So I'll end there.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Ty likes it. Ty, you want to say anything?
This is something that I've been working on with one of my current classes, is that just because you're not the leader of the group doesn't mean you're not leading the group.
Yeah.
And so I think that definition is a really clear way of illustrating that idea.
Yeah. And we do a small group around it. We read that definition out loud, and then we do a small group. What does it mean to your campaign? It's always about their camp. Like, what is it gonna mean for you individually in your campaign to help move it forward? Because you're also setting some basic norms for the group to function for the next 3 months. And if you set them up early, you have a greater chance for that group to be successful, group dynamic wise. Anyone else about that definition?
Your small group idea, I like. Do you have more specific content or question prompts? I guess what I'm thinking about is sometimes students who want to try to be more inclusive just wind up saying maybe not the thing not the right thing maybe, or they're afraid to speak up because they might be saying the wrong thing and don't want to offend someone else or they are completely oblivious that something might be considered offensive. So that piece of it, I would like some clear prompts on to get them to that place where what is, I guess what I'm getting at is effective. That's a piece of it that I would like to try to.
Well, we're gonna do a whole section on group dynamics later, but one of the things I seed in the idea is that they need to understand about the feeling of the group, that the group has a feeling. And what I actually will do is they will, in that group dynamic section, is ask them to have a vibes watcher. And so if a statement like that is made, the vibes watcher, without any, without condemning anyone, say, hey, a statement was just made. I noticed like 3 people really flinched when that statement was made. Do we need to talk about that as a group? And I give them the ability to do it. And if they can't, for whatever, get through that, I ask them to call me in and to help with that. So they're not by themselves, right? I want to give them the first opportunity to think it through, but also I'm there, right? To help with their group dynamic process. And they can say things that might be offensive. And that's why you're going to see later on, and it started mentioned in the reading, let the students who are particularly if it's a group that's like Celine, by the way, in that last video, she was a homeless student on our campus. So in the group, they would let her speak first. Let the people that actually who experience the issue, have them have voice first, rather than someone who's less marginalized speak about the issue in the beginning. So just to be sensitive to those kind of issues, whether they be race or class or gender in the group. And we'll talk more about that for sure in group dynamics, but it's seeing them to begin thinking that way.
Just going to touch here just real briefly on our schedule. So this is the webinar platform. We've sort of covered these 2 here. Next week we go back up to theory. This is sort of the getting set part of things, right? So it's on your mark, go, and now we're getting set. We're sort of backfilling. So the theory, the building power, that's what we'll talk about next Friday. Then we'll get into research and group dynamics, and then right before Thanksgiving, we'll cover strategy and tactics. Then there's a little bit of a break before we cover the other folks. But
let me just end also with, in that setting the tone, I use a metaphor throughout the whole class about the cave, like being in the cave, and what does that mean? And I end that section 2 or chapter 2 with Plato's cave, and that becomes a theme throughout the whole thing. So like we've got no one's doing the reading, let's say in the class. I've got 10 people that got Fs on the quiz. We got 10 souls who are still stuck in the cave. Like I can't get you out. I can't help you get you out of the cave. Like you got to get yourself out. But if you're not doing the reading, you're back in the cave. And so it becomes a metaphor for their trying to get themselves literally and physically and mentally, into wisdom, into freedom, mental freedom.
Great. Well, thanks everybody.